Very impressed with what you have built here in Dems of the Desert. And thank you to Julie for being our moderator. Thank you to Marcy for all her hospitality. And thank you to Joanne for hunting me down. So that I've really enjoyed looking around Palm Springs. I have learned the value of staying hydrated, which I have done. And I've learned that 98 degrees is considered a cool day in June. But to answer your question, so the book is called The Fix, Saving America from the Corruption of a Mob-Style Government. And I gave it that title, and the book has that focus because I wanted to share with the world what I was observing in the early days of the second Trump administration, which I see as very different from the first Trump administration. As bad as that was, it is far worse. And what I observed is this use of power to amass more power. And that's the way mob figures operate. They take power and they use it to inflict pain on their rivals or critics. And by inflicting pain, they can coerce those rivals to come to the table to negotiate their own punishment. And we've seen it with law firms, with the media, with universities, with members of Congress, and even foreign allies with these tariffs. And so I wanted to just talk about that and describe this use of leverage and the manufacture of leverage. I mean, right now in my home state of Michigan, we are seeing the perfect example of that. We have recently completed construction on the Gordie Howe Bridge. This is a bridge that was a very long time coming between Windsor, Ontario and Detroit, Michigan, to improve commerce there. Certainly there are individuals who cross, but mostly it's commercial trucking between Canada and the United States. And we've had a bridge there called the Ambassador Bridge for many decades, but it is the most crowded crossing in America, and it's privately owned. I don't know how a piece of critical infrastructure like that came to be privately owned. But this bridge, the Gordie Howe Bridge, named for the hockey legend, born in Ontario and played in Detroit. Can you imagine two countries agreeing on anything? But this Gordie Howe Bridge, yes, everybody loved it. Canada, unlike Mexico and the Wall, actually paid for this bridge. And the ribbon cutting was scheduled for just a couple of weeks ago. But the private owner of the rival bridge made a $1 million donation to a Trump Political Action Committee, and suddenly President Trump has said, before this bridge can open, we need Canada to pay its fair share. They've already paid 100%. And so what is happening? He is using his power as leverage to amass more power. Whether he extracts more money from the owner of the rival span or something from Canada, I don't know. But we've already invested billions of dollars into this bridge. So that's the kind of tactic I'm talking about when I say mob-style tactics. This is not the way a president has typically taken care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Doesn't give us much hope, except that we've got to elect the right people, right? So you held positions as a prosecutor in the Department of Justice. How is that department operating now? And how did it operate and how should it operate?
How much time do you have? The Department of Justice is a place I worked for almost 20 years of my career. And we were fond of saying it is the only government agency that is named for a virtue. Because it has always been the job of the Justice Department, even though it's populated by humans and it wasn't perfect, but the goal of the Justice Department was not to win cases, but to see that justice is done. We were always taught that we were representatives not of an ordinary party, but of the people. and that our client was justice, and that was the goal. I remember when I became U.S. Attorney, all of us went to Washington for our orientation, and President Obama met with us at the White House in a group, and he said, remember, even though I appointed you, you serve the Constitution and the people. And that was the tradition that had always been the case. Post-Watergate, when there was some use of the government to attack President Nixon's rivals, don't believe J.D. Vance when he says Watergate was no big deal. Watergate was a big deal, and we saw the Nixon administration use the Justice Department and the CIA in ways to attack its political enemies. And after Watergate, a number of reforms were enacted to prevent that from happening again. And one of those was the creation of something called the Principles of Federal Prosecution. Federal prosecutors are trained in these things and held to these standards. If they violate the standards, they can be referred for disciplinary actions, including suspension, loss of pay, termination, referral to bar associations, and even criminal prosecution. And it's a whole body of rules that are norms and policies that say things like, the White House may not communicate with the Justice Department about any specific individual cases. And yet here we are, and we see Truth Social posts that say, Pam, why the hell haven't we yet prosecuted Jim Comey, Letitia James, and Adam Schiff? They're all guilty as hell. Justice must be served, all caps. That is not what is permitted under these principles of federal prosecution. They also say that partisan politics may never play a role in any criminal decision. And man, we took that to heart. We would wring our hands over that. Like, oh, if I bring these charges today, on the same day the mayor or the governor is announcing that program, might that have some effect or look like there's cause and effect? Yeah, we better wait a day. I mean, we took it very, very seriously. And then the third one I'll mention, among so many others, is that even though a prosecutor may obtain an indictment from a grand jury based only on a showing of probable cause, the standard with which they should appear before a grand jury is much higher. Has anybody here ever served on a grand jury? Oh, yay, thank you. Incredible, right? Incredible power. And your job is simply to find probable cause to believe that the crime was committed by this person, and then it will go on to trial where they will have the right to cross-examine witnesses and other kinds of things. But the principles of federal prosecution say that a prosecutor should not even seek an indictment, which after all brings with it incredible costs on a defendant, legal fees, emotional toll on themselves and their families, harm to their reputation. A prosecutor should not seek an indictment if they have only probable cause. They should seek an indictment only if they believe the evidence is sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial, which means they have guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So evidence that, no case is a slam dunk. It may be that a jury sees a case the other way, but the prosecutor is supposed to be convinced when they present that case to the grand jury and ask them to return an indictment that there is evidence sufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And yet, what we are seeing, I believe, is absolute use of partisan politics in seeking indictments. Right, when they're going after Letitia James and Jim Comey, members of Congress simply for making a video where they said lawfully, accurately, that service members do not have a duty to obey an illegal order. Protesters in Texas and Minnesota, you could go on. Jerome Powell, Tim Walz, Jacob Fry, so many of these instances of what appear to be nakedly political targets of criminal law enforcement. And then the last one about not seeking a grand jury's indictment unless you've got enough evidence to convict at trial. It seems to me that some of what we're seeing, like the Broadview 6 case and some of these others, prosecutors are trying to just squeak out an indictment even if they don't have enough evidence, if they just have probable cause, because it seems that the goal is simply to punish people by indicting them as opposed to seeking justice. Ed Martin, you remember this character? I don't know where he is now. They've buried him somewhere at the Justice Department. But this was the guy who was the interim U.S. attorney for a little while in Washington, D.C., and was sending all those letters like to Georgetown and Elon Musk. He ended up being the pardon attorney and the head of the weaponization working group.
Oh my God.
And what he said when he got that job was, we are going to name and shame people. Even if we do not have evidence sufficient to convict them, we will name them and we will shame them, we will charge them anyway, because ours is a society that respects shame. That may be true, but that is not consistent with those principles of federal prosecution. And so now we are, I think, about to see Todd Blanche become the Attorney General. He's the acting Attorney General. And he, in my view, has reigned over much of this use of the Justice Department in a way that advances partisan politics and not justice. But he has done, in my opinion, the worst of all the things that we've seen in the Trump administration, and that was to negotiate this deal to resolve a bogus lawsuit that was dismissed to create a slush fund to reward the people who had violated the law in support of Trump by attacking the Capitol on January 6th, so-called weaponization victims. And even though the slush fund has been pulled back, do you know what's still out there? IRS. Yeah, this forgiveness to Donald Trump, complete immunity from civil cases or audits for any claim that may have been filed previous to the settlement. Experts estimate that the amount of Trump's unpaid tax bills going back all those years is $100 million. In fact, the cynic in me wonders if the slush fund for the insurrectionists wasn't just a front, right? I'm gonna lead with that. When the crowd goes wild, as we know they will, we'll pull it back and say, okay, have it your way. And meanwhile, the thing they really wanted, $100 million for the president, is still lurking out there, and people have forgotten about that. And I think it's because they led with this compensation fund. And so to me, Todd Blanche is wholly unqualified to serve as our nation's next Attorney General. Because he has taken that crown jewel of our government, the Department of Justice, the only agency named for a virtue, and completely tainted it and made it a weapon of the president.
So if I can make a quick follow-up, since we're talking about the Department of Justice, we know the old saw, especially in the legal profession, but now I think it's pretty widely believed, that no offense to the grand juror, that a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. Because, of course, it's only a one-sided presentation. The defendant never presents any part of their case in front of the grand jury. The fact that there have been so many failures to indict coming out of this Department of Justice, does that have any impact at all on the credibility of management, or is it just another, oh well, let's take it and normalize it?
Yes, the fact that we've had so many, and keep in mind, we may not know all the times that they simply decided not to even present an indictment to a grand jury. But we know that there have been many indictments presented to a grand jury where they rejected. One of them was the sandwich thrower in Washington, D.C. Remember that? They actually ended up proceeding against him on a misdemeanor because a grand jury would not indict, which is required for a felony charge. But I think there have been other instances. For example, those members of Congress, the reports are that a grand jury refused to return an indictment against them as well. And, there is the old phrase about you can indict a ham sandwich, but one of the reasons indictments are almost always achieved is because of the rigor that occurs before a prosecutor presents it. As I said, the standard is, even though the grand jury only needs to find probable cause, prosecutors shouldn't go in there unless they believe they've got guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, a much higher standard. And it's reviewed. A line prosecutor prepares it, it's shared with a supervisor, it's vetted. Some offices even have indictment committees that review them, and only then is one sought. So the fact that we're getting so many rejections of indictments says to me that grand jurors are very suspect. One, the cases are weak. I also worry that the Justice Department has lost some of its goodwill. We've heard a lot of judges say that the Justice Department has lost what it has previously enjoyed, which is the presumption of regularity. Because prosecutors have historically conducted themselves consistently with those very high standards, when a prosecutor comes into a courtroom, judges typically believe what they have to say. And now we're seeing many judges saying, I don't believe you. Show me, I need evidence. I can't just take your word for it anymore. And I do worry that although I'm glad to see grand jurors pushing back against what appear to be some frivolous efforts to charge, I do worry that in 4 more years or 8 more years, that if the grand jury and the general public are sensitized to be very skeptical of Justice Department lawyers, it's going to be very hard to restore that presumption of regularity, and we may see it become more difficult for prosecutors to obtain indictments, even in genuine and important cases.
Okay, we need a little more optimism, although my next question may not take us there. Next Saturday, we celebrate 250-year anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. In studying history, has our democracy ever appeared to you to be quite as fragile as it is now at this time?
It certainly has had, its moments. I mean, we had a civil war. It probably doesn't get more fragile than that. And we've had other moments. I think about the Reconstruction South when we had the Black Codes. Think about the Civil Rights Movement. I think about the 1960s when we had so much unrest and the assassinations of JFK and RFK and MLK. I think those are times where our society and our democracy probably seemed very fragile. But right now, I think it's something altogether different. It is capture of our democracy by someone who, as I said, strikes me as someone who's using mob-style tactics to suggest that somehow the ends justify the means. And I think one of the tactics that President Trump has used is stoking grievance and anger at parts of society. So I'm of the view that one of the reasons that the middle class and the lower income American feels left behind is because of the tax and fiscal policies that started with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Do people feel left behind? Yes, and are they? You bet they are. Real wages have gone down tremendously since the 1980s. Tax policy has been cut from the highest earners and from corporations. And so the wealth gap has grown tremendously. And so there are people who are hurting, who work very hard for less, who have to work multiple jobs and still aren't able to afford some of the things that they see others be able to afford. And I also think it's so in our face when we can see how the other half lives, right? You've got Jeff Bezos jetting off to wherever he held his destination wedding in Italy, and meanwhile, you're scrubbing floors and can't make ends meet. And so what Donald Trump has told them is the reason isn't because of the Ronald Reagan tax cuts that we have continued to this day. The reason you're worse off is because of DEI, or immigrants who have taken your jobs, or the LGBTQ community, right? All of these groups somehow are to blame. And so people think, well, I am worse off, and it's not my fault, I'm working really hard. Who should I blame for this? The President of the United States has told us who to blame, and it's the other. Anyone we can label as other. And so we've demonized them. I mean, look at the social media that the White House has put out about its immigration enforcement. I mean, certainly people voted for a president who promised to enforce immigration laws, and that is the prerogative of the electorate and the president. But what the president and his administration have done is to dehumanize the people that they are deporting. Like, you remember that video that came out after those men were sent to the terrorist prison in El Salvador? I mean, it was set to like dramatic music, and they showed them being shoved to their knees and their heads shaved in their underwear. And then we had Kristi Noem stand in front of a cell where they were, stacked 3 high, wearing her Rolex watch. I mean, that was not an accident that was set up. It is an effort to depict certain groups of society as less than. It's white supremacy. And it's done quietly, it's done with dog whistles. but it is done in a way to make people feel superior, because if somebody else is in fear, then I must be superior, and this is what I can blame, this is who I can blame for my financial woes. And I think that's one of the things that's so damaging about this current moment. And in that way, by pandering to the religious right or pandering to working class white Americans who genuinely are feeling left behind, the president has able to capture not only a lot of votes, but also the means of government, right? I mean, we are all about process. We're all about the rule of law. And if you share President Trump's ends, then you will tolerate some of his means, even if they seem a little extreme. And that's the thing I most worry about. It's why I'm really glad to be here and talking to all of you, because we need to make sure our fellow Americans wake up. You know, there's certainly people like you who are aware of what's going on, but I worry there are too many people out there who are unaware of what's happening, or don't care, or are complacent. And those are the persuadables that I think we need to persuade to help them understand what is at stake at this moment.
So you've chosen the title The Fix, and in the book you do discuss solutions of what we can do. Where do you get your inspiration, or can you look at other examples that inspired you to suggest these kinds of fixes?
Well, some of it comes from history. I think this moment has a lot of comparable moments in history. We talked about the Civil War already. I think Watergate is one that has inspired some ideas. But I think the moment that is most akin to our moment is the Gilded Age. Yeah. Right? This is the time of the robber barons, people like, Carnegie and Rockefeller, the oil industry, the railroads. And what we saw at that time was this power grab for money without regard to how it was affecting ordinary people. And so they created, through corrupt means, these monopolies that gouged ordinary consumers. We saw children working in factories. We had tainted meats and food. We had robber barons buying up all the good land. And from that comes some optimism, because we moved out of that. Theodore Roosevelt came along, and instead of being a divisive figure, he was an optimist who looked at all the ways we could improve our society. And so he brought together populists and progressives and led to the progressive era. And we saw things like antitrust laws that busted up some of these monopolies. They called them trusts, I learned, because they utilized a form of corporate structure at the time called trusts to be able to amass all this power. So antitrust was about busting up these big oil companies and railroad companies so that there was competition that would result in lower prices. They passed child labor laws to get kids out of factories. They passed the Food and Drug Safety Act to require inspections and compliance with standards. They passed the National Park Act to make sure that all of us could enjoy certain aspects of natural beauty in society. Why can't we have another progressive era? I think the time has come. And I think it's what some successful politicians have done, from Peter Magyar in Hungary by defeating Viktor Orban to Mamdouh Zandani in New York, which is focusing on affordability and unity and joy, instead of all of this doom and gloom and hate and fear. And I think they're onto something there, with because I think if they can combine an alliance of the populists who voted for Trump and the progressives who want a world of more affordability, more equality, there's a real path to success there.
All right, so then what can we, as concerned members of the community, what can we do to help restore our democracy?
Oh, so much, and you're already doing it. I am so impressed with this group. I had a chance to have dinner last night with a few of the board members, and it's so great just to hear about some of the things you're already doing. And you know, democracy is not a spectator sport. You gotta get out there. I am a big believer that it is that sort of, you know, there are the Trumpers out there who are never going to admit they were wrong, and there are some who are probably just a lost cause. There are the people who really get it, like the people in this room who are working really hard and desperately want to see a restoration of our democracy. But it's that middle group that is focused on, you know, celebrity Dancing with the Stars. They're focused on their sports betting, on their sports betting apps. We got to get them to pay attention. And so some of the things you're already doing, you know, writing postcards to people, knocking on doors, running for office. I mean, there are local races. All of those things are incredibly important. If you're involved in this group, that's wonderful because it's a chance to plug in. Some people who want to be part of the solution don't know where to begin, but a group like this can put you to work and figure out ways. I think we've got to get people who are not regular voters showing up at the polls. Young people vote in abysmal percentages, and they have so much at stake. The average age of the first-time home buyer in the United States is 38 years old. Yeah, out here I heard somebody say 60. Yeah, it's probably true. 106. That should matter for them, right? So finding ways to make young people care, I think, is a really important thing you can do. There's a lot of people in this community with a lot at stake, and finding ways to plug in and do things is really important. So I think another race that's really important that everybody should be focused on are county clerks and secretaries of state. These people control our elections, and so really focusing on those races, I think, is critically important. I'm sure Marcy puts you all to work and Joanne puts you all to work with great tasks, but just saying yes when they ask and finding ways to plug in, I think, is just so important. Being organized the way you are. Participating in peaceful protest. I don't know how many of you have participated in some of the No Kings protests. Anybody? Oh, nice. Nice turnout. Well, as you know, these are incredibly powerful. One is just showing up has a galvanizing effect on other people. I think sometimes we can feel very alone and feel like, am I the only person who thinks our country is just going off the rails? But you get out an event like that, or like coming to a meeting like this, and you realize there are many other people. And so some people say you're just preaching to the choir. Well, sometimes maybe even the choir needs to hear the sermon, right? It's good to feel good and see other people who care about this. Plus you see some funny signs like, you know, the only monarchs should be butterflies. I was like that one. IKEA has better cabinets. That's a classic. A lot of good ones. But the other thing about peaceful protest is it's not just the people there who feel galvanized. It's other people who see you and it begins to dawn on them that there is something terribly wrong in our country. There's a political scientist at Harvard named Erica Chenoweth, who I talk about in my book. She has studied regime change all around the world, and she has concluded that if even only 3.5% of the public participates in peaceful protest, they can effect regime change. And that's because of the other people who see what you're doing. They see all these people, you know, a sea of thousands of people. And it's so important that it be peaceful, right? Because if, maybe I don't have to tell this group that. Don't burn cars and stuff like that. If, you know, it's very counterproductive if the protest is not peaceful, because then protesters can be portrayed as anti-American, you know, crooks and criminals. But peaceful protest can be incredibly valuable because there are others out there who are the ones who maybe aren't paying attention, and they see you on the news, they see you on television, they see you on social media, and that's when it dawns on them, like, there is something terribly wrong in our country, And maybe these people have a point. I see people who look like they are professionals and not just students, people who look like you and me, who are out there and who care deeply. I love those signs that say, "This is my first protest." That's very meaningful that people are out there, that they're so concerned that they're out there protesting. So that's an incredibly important thing that you can do. You can focus on a particular issue. If you care about education and seeing our government dismantling our Department of Education, that's something you can work on. You can work on educating others. Civics education is so incredibly important. If you understand civics and you understand history, you are horrified by what's happening right now. And not everybody remembers their civics, or some schools have removed it in favor of STEM education and other kinds of things. But the most important thing I think we can do is the easiest, and that is talking to people in our spheres of influence. Research says that we are most influenced by the people around us, right? It's why we all tend to dress like our peers and talk like our peers, right? We're just a bunch of chameleons. But when someone you know and trust has a view, you take that to heart, right? I mean, I'm sure people have asked you, as people ask me, who should I vote for in the race for judge? You can have some influence in that if you are knowledgeable and educated. And as I said, there may be the crazy uncle who is the MAGA forever guy, and you don't have to waste your time with them. But if you have, friends and neighbors, don't be afraid to speak out and label yourself as a Democrat. I mean, I think sometimes people are, I don't want to make trouble. I live in a community where there are a lot of people with strong political views. We want to just get along. And so I don't want to say anything about politics because that might be seen as impolite. You don't have to be impolite. You don't have to rage at them. You don't have to say what you're really thinking, like, how in the love of God could you possibly support these people? Don't say that. But looking for opportunities to talk about politics and share with people your views that you're very concerned about what's happening. And it might be the war in Iran, or it might be the use of the Justice Department, or maybe this one is getting so much resonance, and I think it's because it so typifies the corruption and the incompetence of the Trump administration. It may just be the reflecting pool. Don't mess with my reflecting pool. I saw that on my 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C., and I like it very much, thank you. But it's such a microcosm of all that's wrong with the Trump administration, isn't it? He says, I'm going to make it better, I'm going to make it mine, and I'm going to drain it and paint it flag blue without any authorization to do that. He drives his motorcade on it as if, after it's drained, as if marking his territory or something. And then he doesn't send out the contract for bid, he just picks some crony who gives him political donations to do the job. And have you seen this guy?
Oh my God.
Talk about a mob boss.
Yeah.
He's got the mob boss look. And he owns a company with the name, you can't make this up, Green Water. And sure enough, when he does his work and refills, paints the bottom flag blue and repaints it, fills the water turns green, it fills with algae, because they did a shoddy job. What they really needed to do was to improve the filtration system, because the water flows in from the Potomac, and any water that's in there without this filtration system is instantly going to create algae and other kinds of things. But then, and this is the ultimate Trump move, when he screws up, he blames others, vandals and criminals.
Antifa.
And not only is he just blaming people, which alone would be offensive, they're charging people with crimes for property damage. There's no evidence that anybody did, right? Including the cyclist who merely touched the water. So all of it, I think, is so offensive. And I think what's good about it is it's in terms everybody can understand. Some of it's a little hard to understand. They're bombing boats in Venezuela. Some experts say that's frowned upon. Murder, who knew? Those are complicated issues where we may not know all the facts. but everybody gets the reflecting pool, and so that's a good one. So I encourage you to get out there and politely and respectfully chat with people around you and see if you can't plant a seed or two that might cause people to reconsider where they stand on electoral politics.
Many of you have seen on social media that if you look at the myth of narcissism, which seems to have relevance today to this topic, it was a reflecting pool that did him in.
I love it. That's cute.
We'd like to get some questions and answers. Again, questions only. Marcy, are you going to circulate with one of the mics? And then I'll share this one with Barb.